So today, guys, we're going to jump in and review and rate all of the new expansion cards from the Engines of Rebellion Genestealer Cult's Reinforcement drop. So, as per usual, we're going to give everything a 1 to 5 star rating. 1's unplayable, 2's pretty much a bad card, 3 of those kind of situational cards. They can be good in the right situation, or they can just be sort of a bit dead in your hand. 4 are the kind of mainstream cards that you want to be in your making up most of your meta decks, and 5's of those must have S tier game changers. So, without further ado, let's jump on in. Alright, so first and foremost, I actually think in terms of unplayable cards in this faction, the Spotter Ridge Runner just feels like pretty unplayable to me, to be honest. Given that it's an uprising card, that means you need to be able to play other cards after this card. And honestly, like when you're talking about a 7-drop, like what turn are you playing things in addition to this card? Like turn 10, maybe you get one more. I mean, yeah, I think it's a bad card. I think it's very, very rarely going to see much value. And if you just look at the stats itself, it's poor. This ability, by the way, to rally and give Vanguard to an enemy turn. The idea of this is that like you can give it to the Warlord so that you can kind of beat down face basically, and they can't hide behind enemy vanguards, behind their own vanguards. The problem is, I really think they're overvaluing this ability. If you look at the 2 cards that are printed with this and the Eldar card, neither of them are played. They're both really unplayable. So I think, yeah, overall, I think this card needs some reworking. Next up, I would say in the bad cards, I had 1 or 2 that would fall in this category. The one that I've definitely gone for is the Atlan Wolfquad. I think it is a beginner card. It's a common card, so, fair enough. But I just think for a 6-drop, I think having only 6 health with 3 melee, it's not a flyer, remember, so your opponent obviously is going to attack the melee, and at this stage of the game, trading with only 3 melee attack is just not good. And I think the rally is decent. I honestly think this, there may be some niches where this kind of comes in. You can imagine things like Scarab metas and stuff. But honestly, like, I don't know that it's good enough to overcome the really poor stats. If this was a flyer, then maybe it would be different. But as it is, I think it's a bad card. I don't know that I'd go and say it's completely unplayable, especially for beginners or, for example, in draft mode or in certain metas. But it really is bordering on that kind of like 1-star to 2-star border. I'm being kind, and I'm going to give it 2 stars and say overall I think it's a bad card. Okay, now then, on to the situational 3-star cards. Now, this card is one of the hardest cards in the whole game of Warpforge to evaluate right now. On the one hand, I absolutely love it. Like, I love the idea and the design of it. If I'm reviewing how good it is, like in terms of its actual performance and output, I'm no clearer, because part of me thinks, like, in an all-bike, all-vehicle, deck, even if you just look at this almost as a kind of ramp type of card that you make all your units cheaper so you can play them a turn earlier, kind of almost has that Feyburn effect, and it is stunning the board. So I overall think, I'm hoping that this actually turns out to be a good card. But what I've ended up doing is rating it as 3-star situational, because you can only run this in a vehicle deck, right? Make no doubt about it. This is not a card that's going to be in every single GSC deck, but if it turns out that vehicle deck is strong, then I do think that you will see this card, and I do think it could potentially be good. So I think overall, where we are right now, this is probably the one card that could change. It could go up to good, it could go down to bad, depending on how things unfold. But overall, I'm going to say I think situationally it could be good. Next up, we got the Jackal Scout. Now, this card's not going to move heaven and earth, but what I would say with this card is for only 1 energy, it can trigger. Having those cheap units are important, right, for triggering Uprising. So in this faction in particular, I think this card is better because 1 energy bodies in GSC count for more, basically, because of Uprising. And I also think it has a decent rally. Depending on your timing of playing this, you can often see your opponent's hand. That has some value. But then also really picking that clutch thing, like whether it's Will of Gork, for example, and making it cost 1 more, that type of thing. I think it can really mess with your opponent. I think it might seem subtle, but it could be really, really good. I'm looking forward to playing more with this card. But like I say, it's not going to light the world on fire. It's definitely not a bad card, but I don't know that I'm quite confident in giving it good 4 stars. Is it going to be in most meta decks? I'm not sure. So I'm going to say situationally it is good. Now, this card's also kind of interesting When I first look at this card, I thought it was going to be bad, but I am willing to give this 3 stars because, again, because it's an uprising card. So now let's just think for a second about something like the Genestealer Familiar. It costs 1 energy and it gives flank to a neighbouring unit. So on E6 you could play Jackal Specialist, then you can play the Familiar, which then gives this flank. It immediately gets to blast, and it puts a sabotage in the enemy hand. Now that is a very, very powerful turn. Yes, you need the Genestealer Familiar, but there is also a spell that gives flank as well, don't forget. This could benefit from being stealthed from the new Rampant Infestation, or whatever it's called, the 1-drop, and there are other things like Perfect Ambush as well. So overall, I think, like, I can't say it's bad. It does rely on some synergy, I think, to be good. But when you get that, it's very good. I would say, therefore, that it overall is situationally good. And last but not least, I've got the Jackal Out Rider. Now, the reason I'm giving this 3 stars, similar theme that we're talking about here, with especially these ambush cards. Like, obviously, they're much better if they get a trigger, if they get stealth, if they get given flank, if they get given immune, invulnerability from Perfect Ambush. Of course, these cards all go through the roof with those abilities. But what I think earns this card a 3-star and not a 2-star is because I actually think the stats are just decent enough. It's an ambush card, so your opponent doesn't know what card you've played, and as long as you're playing it in a deck with other ambush cards, they're going to be confused. The chances are that they take the 50-50 and hit the range attack, and if they do, you've traded for 4. This card, 4 range is trading up for a 3 energy card, so it's actually got 4 health as well for 3, so it's actually got good stats on its own. Obviously, if you get the ambush off, and obviously if you get to gain flank and blast 2 and concussive, then this card gets broken, pretty broken, to be honest, real quick. But I try to think about, like, what the flaw of the card is, and I think even the worst case scenario, it's still pretty decent. So I would say it's situational. To really get the best out of it, you're not going to do that every time, and that's why I've got it kind of like at the top of 3 stars. Alright, moving on, we have got our 4-star cards. 4-star cards. First one, I have got the Atlan Jackal. Now, this only costs 2 energy, and I think that's a huge reason why this is getting 4 stars, because for 2 energy, that means when we've got something that's that cheap, we can start to combine it. And GSC is a combo faction. It's possibly the best combo faction in the game, to be honest. So what are we looking to do? Well, first of all, for 2 energy and 3 health, that means that the Warlords can't necessarily trade with it, and it comes with camouflage, so it also means cheap spells don't really help with removing it. Now, obviously, against the new Warlord, that could kill this straight away, so that's something we'd need to check. Is Sazan the new meta? But other than that, like, this card is pretty good, and comboing this out with other sabotagers, obviously, this can be really, really powerful. Like, yeah, obviously if you play this on 2 and then you play Cut 'em Off on 3, that's dealing 4 damage. That's really, really good. But I think holding it in your hand and playing out a combo on, say, turn 7 or something like that is really good too. So I actually think this card is really good. It doesn't have many downsides, and it only costs 2 energy. Okay, next up we have the card I just mentioned a second ago. It costs 3 energy. It is a stratagem, and it is Cut Them Off. I think this card is fantastic. This card is the card that has transformed the sabotage archetype. What do I mean by that? Well, what used to happen with sabotage is you used to play the card and your opponent would just remove it straight away. And so it was kind of like this. Sabotage worked more in a way of it just kind of like disrupted it, just kind of delayed what your opponent was trying to do. So it kind of bought you time. That's what it was as a mechanic. But I don't think that that's how the devs kind of intended it to be designed. And I think the true kind of idea never really quite came to fruition. What Cut Them Off does is it puts 2 of the 3 cost, so the expensive sabotage cards in your opponent's hand, and it kind of makes them give up on the idea that they can just trade evenly, getting rid of sabotages from the hand for the cost that you put them in hand. If they do that, they'll fall behind on tempo. So rather than being even on tempo, they start to fall behind. Of course, if you then come in on turn 4 with Underground Network, which then makes these things cost 1 more, making them 4 each, your opponent is almost forced to abandon any hope of getting rid of them. And unless they're playing some really slow control deck, and they, maybe some sort of like Willowgok Orc control Ghazghkull build could do. But most decks just have to just pretty much ignore that, and that's where I'm saying it kind of transforms the Sabotage archetype, because now you finally are going to get Sabotage cards sticking in your opponent's hand. That makes Benedictus, the Day of Ascension, a Trap Sprung, which is now an S tier card in my opinion. Those cards are really powerful, whereas before they were very sort of very average, very situational. Those cards are all really good now, so you get the payoff. So I Cut Them Off is actually a common card, so everyone can get this, and it's actually essential. So if you want to play a Sabotage deck, I think 2 of these now is fundamental to that style of gameplay. Alright, on to the 5-star cards. So we've got 3. I would say that the new Warlord is 5 stars. Now, you could make an argument that it's 4 stars, but honestly, I think just being able to trade, if you think about its ability, it costs 2 energy and it gets +1 range and snipe. Well, with 3 range and snipe, that means that we can remove our opponent's stuff without losing health. That in itself has a really nice kind of control element. It allows you to get into the late game without kind of suffering, without taking damage. But obviously, putting a Sabotage every time that it slays something in addition to that is just super powerful. For me, that's what just tips this over the edge into the S tier. And the combination with, if you've not seen, go and check out my Zanari Sabotage deck. I think it just is really, really powerful. One of the downsides of a Sabotage archetype is that it can be a bit vulnerable to aggro, whereas Zanari is really good against those cheap aggro units that our opponent might be trying to put down quickly to beat us down. So he kind of clears up really nicely while still continuing putting those Sabotage cards in our opponent's hands. Overall, I think this card is a really excellent addition to the game and a very, very powerful Warlord indeed. I'm giving this guy 5 stars. I could see an argument for 4. Let me know in the comments what you think, but I think overall I'd say this is a really 5-star card. And speaking of 5-star cards, I think the Atlan Leader is there too. I mean, guys, like, these stats are just bonkers for 4. Forget everything else. I just think like a 4 energy flanker with these stats, just really, really strong, and of course, then having the extra ability to make all your friendly vehicles cost 1 less. I mean, that's any kind of energy mandatory is an S tier ability, so it's very, very powerful. In addition to that, really is going to bring any kind of ambush approach to the game to life, which has been one of the weaker parts of GSC. And of course, this guy is just the ambush dream, so he's just good in pretty much whatever you're trying to do. If it's ambush, if you want to remove your opponent, if you just want to make your stuff cheaper and fly out the board with something like Uprising, it kind of works in everything. I think this card is going to be S tier and in pretty much every deck for the Genestealer different archetypes. And last but not least, I am placing the Epic Rogue Informant Stratagem. It costs 1 energy. It says choose a card from your deck. So remember, that just says choose a card. That means it will show you 3 cards in your deck, and that therefore that could show you stratagems, right? It doesn't say choose a troop from your deck. It could be a stratagem. So you have to think about how you use this in the deck, the kind of deck composition when you're deck building. But ultimately, if it is a troop, give it stealth. This enables you to play, make use of cards that previously weren't played, but because they didn't have stealth. You know, ambush cards are going to massively benefit from this. It's going to be so good for ambush. And yeah, overall, like basically getting a choice of 3 cards and being able to put that thing straight into your hand, that's good in itself. But then the fact that that troop's then going to get played with stealth is super good. And do you know what, guys? For 1 energy, even sometimes just drawing like perfect ambush. Like, you might not even bother with the troop and the stealth thing. Imagine it just, 1 of the 3 cards, it shows you perfect ambush. Or, you know, the Saboteur, or something that you just, that's a bad example, but Nexus in my Nexus comment already had stealth. I didn't need to give it stealth. It doesn't matter. I get to draw that card and put it in my hand. So, it just that ability in itself, it would have made it 4 stars. But giving it stealth to a troop, that pushes this over the edge. I think this is S tier, 5 stars. Absolutely fantastic card. So there you go, guys. That's all of the cards from the reinforcement. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Have I got this right? Are there any that you would change? Keen to hear from you guys. Obviously, some of these cards need more testing and playing with because the raid's still quite new. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how I have rated them there. So there you go, guys. That is the Engines of Rebellion GSC expansion tier list. I'll see you in the next one.